People do not leave relationships because they stopped caring. They leave because they never felt safe enough to stay. That single truth is going to reframe everything you think you know about the person who pulls away from you. And I need you to sit with that discomfort right now, because what I am about to tell you runs completely against every instinct your wounded heart is screaming at you to follow. You have been measuring this wrong. You have been treating distance as rejection, silence as indifference, and withdrawal as a declaration of war. And every action you have taken from that misreading has pushed the very thing you want further out of reach. There is a pattern, a deeply embedded psychological architecture that governs how certain people attach, retreat, and ultimately decide whether you are worth returning to. And the people who crack this pattern do not do it through persistence or passion or pain. They do it through something far more difficult, something that will demand the absolute best version of you. Stay with me, because what comes next is not about them. It has never been about them. It is about who you are becoming, and whether that person is even worth coming back to. You have spent nights staring at your phone, waiting for a message that does not come, rehearsing conversations in your head that never happen, and slowly, methodically, dismantling your own self-worth in the process. That is not love. That is psychological imprisonment. And the most dangerous part is that you built the cell yourself, handed over the key, and called it devotion. Let me tell you something about avoidant attachment that most people get completely wrong. The avoidant person in your life is not cold. They are not broken beyond repair. They are not choosing someone else over you. They are doing something far more precise and far more painful. They are protecting themselves from the one thing their entire nervous system was conditioned to fear from childhood. And that thing is need. Raw, visible, undeniable emotional need. The moment you come to them desperate, the moment your anxiety is written all over your face and bleeding through every text message you send, their system does not read that as love. It reads it as danger. It reads it as the beginning of engulfment. It reads it as the first sign of a trap closing around them. This was not decided consciously. This is not something they sat down and chose. This pattern was carved into them long before they ever met you, possibly before they even had the language to describe what they were feeling. A child who learned that expressing need led to humiliation, withdrawal, or punishment from a caregiver does not grow up and simply forget that lesson. The nervous system does not forget. It adapts. It builds walls. It develops a sophisticated and self-sufficient exterior that looks like strength from the outside, but functions as isolation from the inside. And when you showed up, warm, open, perhaps even overwhelming in your affection, their system did not celebrate. It went on high alert. Think about that for a moment. The very love you were offering, the very openness you thought was your greatest gift to them, was being processed by their nervous system as a threat. Not because you are wrong, not because your love is too much, but because their internal architecture was never built to receive it without triggering alarm. And now you are standing outside that architecture, throwing yourself against the walls, and wondering why they will not open the door. Here is where most people make the catastrophic mistake, and I mean catastrophic in the truest sense. A collapse of something that could have been built into something extraordinary. The moment the avoidant person starts pulling back, the anxious person escalates. More messages, more emotional displays, more declarations of feeling, more demands for reassurance, more confrontations about what this relationship means. And every single one of those moves, no matter how justified they feel, no matter how rational they seem inside your own pain, confirms exactly what the avoidant person feared. That closeness costs too much, that intimacy is suffocating, that you are not a safe place to land, you are a place where they will be consumed. You are not a bad person for doing this. You need to hear that clearly. The anxious and avoidant pairing is one of the most common and most torturous relationship dynamics in human psychology, and it operates almost entirely on autopilot. Your attachment system is activated, your fear of abandonment is screaming, your entire biological wiring is pushing you toward protest behavior, toward doing something, anything, to reestablish connection with the person who is moving away. This is primal. This goes back further than language. This is the infant screaming for the caregiver who does not come. And somewhere deep inside you, that infant is still running the show. But here is the hard truth that most self-help content refuses to deliver with the weight it deserves. That infant cannot be allowed to make adult decisions anymore. Because the infant only knows one strategy: cry louder, reach harder, protest more intensely, and that strategy, applied to an avoidant adult, is the fastest path to destroying any chance of genuine reconnection. Every time you beg, you lose ground. Every time you send that extra message when they have not replied, you hand them evidence for the story their nervous system is already telling. Every time you make your pain visible in a way that places the burden of that pain squarely on their shoulders, you confirm their deepest fear, that loving someone means being consumed by them. So what do you do? What is the move that actually changes the dynamic? And I want you to understand something before I answer that. The move I am going to describe is not a tactic. It is not a manipulation strategy. It is not a way to make them chase you by pretending you do not care. Because that approach, the calculated withdrawal, the fake indifference, the manufactured mystery, crumbles the moment it is tested. And it will be tested. What I am describing is something that requires a genuine internal transformation. Something that, if you actually do it, will change not just this relationship, but every relationship and every area of your life that touches on your own self-worth. The first thing you must do, and this is not metaphorical, this is structural, is you must stop making them the gravitational center of your emotional universe. Right now, in the architecture of your inner world, they have a weight that distorts everything around them. Your mood rises and falls based on whether they responded. Your sense of self-worth expands and contracts based on whether they showed warmth or distance in any given interaction. Your entire day is organized around the question of where you stand with them. And as long as that is true, you are not in a relationship with a person. You are in a relationship with your own anxiety, and they are simply the object onto which that anxiety is projected. This matters because the avoidant person, whether consciously or not, can feel that gravitational pull. They can feel that they have become responsible for your emotional regulation, and there is nothing more suffocating to an avoidant nervous system than the awareness that another person's stability depends on them. It does not make them feel needed. It does not make them feel loved. It makes them feel trapped. It activates their deepest wound, the belief that closeness always comes with a price, that being loved by someone means being responsible for them, that intimacy is a form of debt that can never be fully repaid. When you withdraw that gravitational pull, not through manipulation, but through genuine reinvestment in your own life, something shifts. And it shifts not because you have played a clever game, but because you have actually become a different person to be around. You are no longer the person whose eyes search their face for reassurance every time they speak. You are no longer the person who reads catastrophe into a 2-hour response delay. You are no longer the person whose emotional state is a weather system that they feel responsible for navigating. You become someone who is genuinely present with them when you are together and genuinely present with your own life when you are apart. And that combination, is what an avoidant person's nervous system actually finds safe. And here is where the psychology deepens in a way that most people are not prepared to face honestly. Because what I just described, withdrawing the gravitational pull, reinvesting in your own life, sounds simple when it is written down. It sounds like common sense. But the reason almost nobody actually does it, the reason people read this advice and nod and then go home and send the desperate message anyway, is because doing it requires you to confront something you have been running from for a very long time. It requires you to sit with the possibility that they might not come back. And your entire system, every cell in your body that has been organized around maintaining this connection, revolts against that possibility with a force that feels almost physical. This is the crucible. This is the moment where most people break and reach for the phone, and I understand that impulse more than you know, because the pain of uncertainty, of not knowing where you stand, of sitting in the silence and not filling it, is one of the most psychologically difficult things a human being can endure. We are wired for resolution. We are wired to seek clarity, to close open loops, to re-establish contact with those we are bonded to. Sitting in the uncertainty without acting on it goes against almost everything your nervous system is demanding of you in that moment. But growth, real growth, the kind that permanently shifts who you are, lives exactly on the other side of that unbearable moment. The moment you choose to stay with the discomfort instead of collapsing it through anxious action, something begins to change inside you. Not immediately, not dramatically, but structurally. The way a bone that has been fractured and allowed to heal properly becomes denser than it was before the break. You are building a new kind of tolerance, a new relationship with your own emotional experience, a capacity to feel the fear of loss without being entirely governed by it. And this matters profoundly, not just for this relationship, but for the entire trajectory of your life, because the person who cannot sit with uncertainty will always be controlled by whoever holds the uncertainty. The person who cannot tolerate the possibility of loss will always make decisions from a place of desperation rather than from a place of genuine choice. And decisions made from desperation are almost universally self-defeating. They push away what you want. They confirm the worst fears of the person you are trying to reach. They shrink you into a version of yourself that you do not recognize and do not respect. So let us talk about what you actually do with that time. The time you would have spent composing and deleting messages, the time you would have spent analyzing every word of their last communication, the time you would have spent constructing elaborate theories about what their silence means. Because this time is not empty. This time is the most important raw material you have, and what you build with it will determine not just whether this relationship survives, but whether you deserve the relationship you are hoping to return to. You go back to yourself. And I do not mean that in the soft, motivational poster sense of the phrase. I mean it literally and with complete seriousness. You identify the parts of your life that you have been neglecting, because when you are consumed by anxious attachment, you always neglect things. Your work suffers, your friendships become instrumental, maintained not for their own sake, but as sources of distraction or validation or analysis of the relationship. Your physical health becomes an afterthought. Your creative pursuits, your ambitions, the things that made you interesting and alive before this person entered your life, they go quiet. And the terrible irony is that the very qualities that made you attractive to this person in the first place, the qualities that drew them to you initially, have been slowly starved of oxygen by your obsessive focus on maintaining the connection. Rekindle those things, not as performance, not as a strategy designed to make them notice what they are missing, but because you owe it to yourself to be a full human being regardless of what happens with this relationship. Because the version of you that existed before the anxiety took over, that person was genuinely worth knowing. That person had momentum and direction and vitality. And somewhere in the months or years of this attachment dynamic, that person got buried under layers of emotional reactivity and fear-driven behavior. There is something else that happens when you genuinely return to yourself. And this is the part that the purely strategic advice always misses. When you stop performing okayness and actually start building it, your entire energy changes. The avoidant person who has been maintaining distance because your need felt overwhelming begins to experience something different when they are around you. They begin to experience the version of you that does not require constant management. The version of you that can be in a conversation without the conversation being secretly about reassurance. The version of you that is genuinely interested in them, not as a solution to your anxiety, not as a source of validation, but as a human being whose inner world you find genuinely compelling. That shift in energy is not subtle. People feel it. Avoidant people, who have often developed extraordinary sensitivity to the emotional states of others, precisely because they grew up needing to anticipate and manage those states, feel it immediately. And what they feel is space. Not the cold, punishing space of someone who has withdrawn in anger, not the calculated distance of someone playing games, but the warm, genuine space of someone who is okay, someone who is not asking anything of them in this moment, someone whose presence does not carry the weight of unspoken demand. This is what safety feels like to an avoidant nervous system, not grand romantic gestures, not tearful declarations of unconditional love, not promises that you will never ask too much of them. Safety feels like being around someone who does not need you to be anything other than what you are, in this moment, right now. Safety feels like a conversation that does not have an agenda hidden underneath it. Safety feels like the absence of that particular tension, the tension of feeling that someone's emotional well-being is suspended on your next words, your next action, your next decision about how much of yourself to give. And you cannot manufacture that feeling through technique. You cannot fake your way into creating genuine safety for another person. This is why the calculated approach, the deliberate pulling away designed to trigger their interest, almost always fails in the long run. Because the moment the avoidant person gets close again and realizes that the ease they felt was performance, the moment they sense that underneath the apparent okayness, there is still that desperate need pulling at them, the walls go up faster and higher than before. Because now there is not just the original fear, now there is the additional wound of having been deceived, of having been maneuvered rather than genuinely met. The path forward demands something harder and more honest than strategy. It demands that you actually do the work of becoming someone who is not primarily defined by their need for this particular person's validation. And that work is not quick. It is not comfortable. It involves sitting with some genuinely painful realizations about why you became so attached so intensely, about what need inside you this person was meeting that you were not meeting for yourself, about what it says about your relationship with your own worth that another person's attention felt so necessary for you to feel okay. These are not comfortable questions, but they are the right questions, and the person who is willing to sit with them, to answer them honestly, to do something constructive with what they discover, that person is building something that no relationship dynamic can take from them. They are building a self that is worth returning to, a self that is genuinely attractive, not in the superficial sense, but in the deepest possible sense. Attractive because it radiates the kind of groundedness and self-possession that every human being, avoidant or otherwise, is drawn toward on a level that bypasses conscious analysis entirely. Now consider something that almost nobody who is caught in this dynamic ever pauses long enough to examine. The story you are telling yourself about this person, about what their distance means, about what their silence says about your value, about what their withdrawal reveals about the future of this connection. That story is not objective reality. That story is a construction. It is built from your past experiences, your earliest attachment wounds, your deepest fears about what you deserve and what is possible for you. And you have been treating that constructed story as though it were a factual report about the world. You have been making life-altering decisions based on a narrative your wounded self assembled in the dark. The avoidant person pulls back. Your nervous system immediately begins generating explanations. They are losing interest. They found someone better. They never really cared. You were too much. You were not enough. Something you said crossed a line they cannot forgive. Something you did revealed a flaw that cannot be overlooked. And you cycle through these explanations with the intensity of a detective working a case, except that unlike a detective, you are not actually interested in the truth. You are interested in certainty, even terrible certainty. Even the certainty that it is over feels preferable to the unbearable ambiguity of not knowing. Because at least if you know it is over, you can stop hoping, and somewhere in the exhausted wreckage of your anxiety, stopping the hope feels like it might bring relief. But here is what that story-making is actually doing to you beneath the surface. Every time you construct a narrative in which their distance is evidence of your unworthiness, you are not just interpreting a situation, you are reinforcing a neural pathway. You are deepening a groove in your psychological landscape that says, when someone I care about pulls away, it means something is fundamentally wrong with me. And the more you run that pattern, the more automatic it becomes. The faster it activates, the harder it is to interrupt. Until eventually, it is not just this person who triggers it. Every relationship, romantic, professional, personal, begins to carry the same charge. Every moment of ordinary human distance becomes evidence in the same old case against yourself. This is what unaddressed attachment wounds do over time. They do not stay contained to the relationship that originally activated them. They spread. They colonize your interpretation of every human interaction until your entire social world feels fragile and threatening and contingent on other people's approval in ways that exhaust you and isolate you simultaneously. And the tragedy is that most people experiencing this do not recognize it as a wound that can be healed. They experience it as a personality trait, as just the way they are, as proof that they are fundamentally more sensitive than other people, more intense, more deeply feeling, when in reality what they are experiencing is the predictable output of a nervous system that was shaped by experiences it never fully processed. Processing those experiences is not optional if you want to genuinely change this dynamic. And by processing, I do not mean talking about them until you have constructed a coherent narrative that makes you feel like a sympathetic protagonist in your own story. Processing means actually going into the emotional content of those early experiences, the moments of abandonment, the moments of rejection, the moments when you learned that love was conditional or unpredictable or painful, and allowing yourself to feel what you could not fully feel then because you were too young, because the stakes were too high, because there was nobody safe enough to feel it with. This is the work that therapy exists to facilitate. And I want to be direct about this because the cultural conversation around therapy has become so saturated with either overclaiming or dismissiveness that people have lost sight of what it actually is. Therapy, good therapy, the kind that is oriented toward genuine structural change rather than indefinite symptom management, is one of the most demanding and most rewarding things a human being can do for themselves. It is not weakness, it is not self-indulgence. It is the systematic excavation of the architecture that is currently running your life without your conscious permission. And if you are caught in an anxious avoidant dynamic that keeps repeating across relationships, if you find yourself here again and again with different people, but the same essential wound being activated, that is a signal clear enough to demand attention. But alongside the deeper work, there are things you can practice in the day-to-day fabric of your life that begin to shift the pattern from the outside in, even as the internal work proceeds from the inside out. One of the most powerful of these is the deliberate cultivation of what psychologists call distress tolerance, the capacity to experience a difficult emotional state without immediately acting to eliminate it. When the urge to reach out comes, and it will come with a force and urgency that feels almost biological because it is almost biological, the practice is not suppression. You do not pretend the urge is not there. You do not tell yourself you do not care. You acknowledge the urge fully and completely. You name it. You feel its texture and its weight, and then you choose not to act on it. Not because acting would be wrong, but because you are practicing the experience of being able to choose your response rather than being dictated to by your reaction. That gap between stimulus and response, that is where your freedom lives. And every time you widen that gap, even by a fraction, you are doing something profound. You are demonstrating to yourself that you are not simply a creature of your impulses. You are not at the mercy of your own nervous system. You have agency. And that demonstration accumulates over time into something that begins to feel like genuine self-respect. Not the performed self-respect of someone who has decided to act confident, the actual self-respect of someone who has proven to themselves, through repeated action under pressure, that they can be trusted to make decisions that align with their deeper values, rather than their immediate relief-seeking. And that self-respect, real, earned, demonstrated self-respect, changes everything about how you show up in the presence of the avoidant person. Because the thing that an avoidant person finds most disorienting, most unexpected, most genuinely compelling in someone they have been keeping at arm's length, is the discovery that the person is actually okay. Not performing okay, not strategically distant, but genuinely, groundedly, warmly okay. That they have not collapsed in the absence of consistent reassurance, that they have not become bitter or punishing or desperate, that they have somehow remained or become a person who is full rather than empty, directed rather than lost, secure rather than clinging. That discovery creates something in the avoidant person's psychology that almost nothing else can create: curiosity without threat. Normally, closeness and threat arrive together for them. Normally, the person who wants to be close is also the person whose need creates pressure, whose emotional state creates obligation, whose presence carries the weight of unspoken demand. But here, in this unexpected configuration, is someone who wants to be close and who simultaneously creates no pressure. Someone whose presence feels like an open door rather than a closing trap. Someone who, for reasons the avoidant person cannot fully articulate, feels safe to move toward. You have arrived at the moment that separates the people who change from the people who simply understand change intellectually and then return to exactly who they were before. Everything I have laid out for you in this conversation is worthless, completely and absolutely worthless, if it remains inside your head as interesting psychological theory. The avoidant person in your life is not going to be moved by your understanding of attachment theory. The relationship you want is not going to be built by the person who listened carefully and nodded and felt genuinely moved and then picked up their phone and sent the message they always send. The only thing that matters now is what you do in the next 24 hours. Not next week, not when you feel ready, not when the pain becomes manageable enough to think clearly. Right now, in this state, with this discomfort sitting exactly where it is sitting inside your chest. Choose one thing you have been abandoning while you were consumed by this dynamic. One pursuit, one relationship, one responsibility to yourself, and return to it today with the full weight of your attention. That single act, repeated tomorrow and the day after and the day after that, is how a person is rebuilt from the inside out. That is how the gravitational center shifts. That is how you become someone genuinely worth returning to. The question was never whether they would come back. The question was always whether you would finally come home to yourself. That work begins now.